There is a world within our world, a world that smells of hay and leather and honest sweat. A world where time is measured not in minutes, but in rhythms. The rhythm of a breath, the rhythm of a heartbeat, the steady, earth-shaking rhythm of a canter. For most of my life, that world was my entire universe. My name is Alex, and this is the story of how I was exiled from that universe, and the long, difficult, and extraordinary journey I took to find my way back. It's a story about a fall, but more importantly, it's about everything that comes after the fall. My story doesn't start with a champion. It starts with a shaggy, dirt-brown Shetland pony named Biscuit at a local 4-H club. I was 7, and he was, to put it mildly, a cynic. His favorite pastime was scraping my knees against the fence posts. But he taught me the first and most crucial lesson: resilience. You cannot negotiate with a pony. You can only learn to understand him. From Biscuit, I graduated to a series of school horses, each one a character in my unfolding saga. There was Lady, a chestnut mare who pretended to spook at everything to test your nerve. There was Duke, an old campaigner who knew his job better than any rider, and would patiently tolerate your mistakes. They were my teachers. They built my seat, my hands, and my heart. But the true love of my young life was a dapple gray thoroughbred gelding named Apollo. I was 16 when I met him. He was a failed racehorse, all nervous energy and long, elegant legs. He had a spirit that was both fiery and fragile. We saw each other, and we just fit. It wasn't easy. He was sensitive, I was passionate. We had arguments. He'd toss his head in frustration at my clumsy aids. I'd get flustered at his nervous spooks. But we learned each other's language. It was a language of subtle shifts in weight, of almost imperceptible breathing changes, of intuition. In the show Jumping Ring, that language became a symphony. We weren't a rider and a horse. We were a single centaur flying. We spent years building our partnership. We competed every weekend, moving up from the low children's jumpers to the more competitive amateur owner divisions. The ribbons piled up, blue and red and yellow, but they were just pieces of silk. The real prize was the feeling of absolute unity, as we soared over a massive oxer, the crowd a blur, the only sound the beat of his hooves and the rush of air. We were invincible, or so I believed. The qualifier for the regional championships was on a perfect October day. The air was crisp, the leaves were turning. Apollo was electric, dancing beneath me in the warm-up ring. He knew it was a big day. I was confident, maybe too confident. The course was the biggest we'd ever attempted, but we were ready. The first half of the course was flawless. We were flying. We turned to the combination. It was a triple, a wide oxer, one stride to a tall vertical, 2 strides to another oxer. It was the technical heart of the course. As we approached, I saw a judge shift in her chair just behind the jump standard. A flash of movement. Apollo saw it too. I felt his body tense for a split second beneath me. I should have softened, reassured him, given him a longer rein. But in my competitive drive, I pushed. I drove him forward, demanding the takeoff spot I wanted. It was the wrong ask. He was already unsure, and my demand felt like a punishment. He took off, but his mind was elsewhere. We cleared the first element, landed for the one stride to the vertical, and then he propped. He put his front feet down and stopped. Hard. I kept going. The world became a violent, tumbling kaleidoscope of blue sky, green grass, and brown dirt. I remember the sound most of all. Not the thud of my body, but the sickening, hollow crack of my collarbone breaking. And then, the most terrifying sound a horse person can hear. A sharp, pained scream from Apollo. He had scrambled away from me, tangled in the poles, his eyes white with panic. People were everywhere. A medic, my trainer, course officials. The physical pain was a white-hot fire in my shoulder, but it was nothing compared to the searing guilt and fear. Is he hurt? Did I hurt him? They led him away, limping slightly, but it was mostly shock. I had shattered his trust, and in doing so, I had shattered us. The aftermath was a special kind of hell. Surgery on my shoulder, followed by months of physical therapy. But the physical healing was straightforward. The psychological wounds were far deeper. The nightmares were relentless. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the sensation of falling jolting me awake. I'd hear that crack, see the terror in his eyes. I tried to go back to the barn after I was medically cleared. The smell that had once been the scent of joy now made me nauseous. The sound of a horse cantering made my heart pound with anxiety. I tried to get on a quiet school horse. My hand shook so badly I couldn't hold the reins. My body was a statue of fear. Every cell in my being screamed that I was about to fall, about to fail, about to hurt another horse. Apollo, my beautiful, sensitive Apollo, could feel my terror from the ground. When I went to his stall, he'd turn his head away. The language we'd built was gone, replaced by a wall of shared trauma. I made the hardest decision of my life. I sold him to a professional rider, a calm, quiet woman who could give him the confidence he so desperately needed. It felt like an amputation. I quit riding. I quit the barn. I packed away my boots and my saddle and tried to build a new life, a normal life, outside of those arena fences. For 2 years, I succeeded. I went to college. I got a job. I had friends who didn't know anything about horses. But it was like living in black and white. I was haunted by a ghost of who I used to be. I missed it with a physical ache, a hollow feeling in my chest that nothing else could fill. Then, one rainy Saturday, lost in my own thoughts, I took a wrong turn and ended up on a dirt road I'd never seen before. And I smelled it. That smell. Hay, manure, leather. It pulled me like a magnet. I saw a small rustic sign. Willow Creek Stable. It wasn't a fancy show barn. It looked peaceful. I pulled over, my heart hammering for the first time in years. But not entirely from fear. There was a thread of longing there, too. I walked to the fence, and that's when I saw him. In a muddy paddock, standing alone in the rain, was a horse like no other I'd ever seen. He wasn't elegant or refined. He was a monument, a massive bay built like a draft cross, with a broad back, feathered feet, and a head that seemed carved from stone. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, watching the rain fall with a look of profound, unshakable calm. He was the still point in a turning world. He ambled over to the fence. He didn't nuzzle for treats. He just looked at me. His eyes were deep, dark pools of infinite patience. A sign on the fence was almost illegible. Atlas needs a job. It felt less like fate and more like a challenge. Or a rescue. I found the barn owner, an older woman named Sarah with kind eyes and leathery hands. I told her my story, my voice shaking. The fall, the fear, the loss. She listened without judgment. Atlas, she said simply, is a therapy horse. His job is to heal. Maybe he's the one you need. And so, I began leasing him. There was no talk of jumping, no pressure to canter. For the first month, I didn't even ride. I just went to the barn. I brushed him for hours, losing my hands in his thick winter coat. I picked out his big, sturdy hooves. I sat on a bucket in his stall while he ate his hay. I was relearning the language of peace. The first time I got on him, my stomach was in knots. He was so wide, I could barely get my legs around him. But as I settled into the saddle, something remarkable happened. Nothing. He didn't move. He just stood there, solid as the rock he was named for, absorbing my anxiety. He let out a deep, sighing breath, as if to say, "See? I've got you." Our rides were painfully slow. We walked, and walked, and walked. We walked around the arena. We walked on the trails behind the barn. Atlas's walk was a steady, rolling gait that felt like the earth itself was moving beneath me. He was unflappable. Birds would burst from the bushes. He'd flick an ear. A tractor would backfire in the distance. He'd pause and look, then plod on. He was teaching me a new language. A language of quiet confidence. A language of, we have nowhere else to be, and that's okay. Months turned into a year. The sharp edges of my fear began to soften, worn down by the relentless, gentle rhythm of his walk. I started to breathe again in the saddle. I started to look up, to see the path ahead instead of just his mane. And then, Sarah mentioned the Bond Show. It was an annual event at Willow Creek, with games and low, optional jumps. "I think you and Atlas should enter the hopping class," she said, a glint in her eye. The old fear roared back. "No, I can't. I won't." "Alex," she said, her voice firm but kind. "Look at him. He is the definition of steady. This isn't about competition. It's about celebration. It's about seeing how far you've come." The morning of the show dawned gray and threatening rain. My old show day nerves were back, but they were different. This wasn't the nervous energy of wanting to win. It was the raw vulnerability of being seen again. Atlas, of course, was asleep in his stall. The hopping, Course was a series of cross rails and tiny verticals, maybe 2 feet high. To my old self, it would have been an insult. Now, it looked like the Grand National. As our turn approached, the skies opened. A cold, steady rain began to fall, slickening the grass arena. My hands were freezing inside my wet gloves. I walked Atlas to the in-gate, my heart thudding against my ribs. I looked at the first little cross rail. It might as well have been a wall of fire. I was back there on Apollo, feeling that sickening loss of balance. I stopped Atlas. I closed my eyes, feeling the rain on my face. I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't a fearless competitor. I was a person who was afraid, and who was choosing to try anyway. I leaned forward and wrapped my arms around Atlas's thick, wet neck, burying my face in his mane. He stood perfectly still, his warmth seeping into me. "Okay, big guy," I whispered, my voice choked. "Just you and me. No pressure." I clicked to him, and he moved into his steady, rolling trot. We approached the first jump. I felt my entire body lock up with remembered terror. I held my breath. And Atlas, he felt it. He felt my fear, my rigidity. And instead of jumping, he simply dropped to a walk and stepped carefully over the poles, as if he were crossing a stream. He knew I wasn't ready. A few people chuckled warmly. And instead of humiliation, I felt a wave of overwhelming gratitude. He was protecting me. He was saying, "It's okay. We can do this your way." I took a deep, shuddering breath, the kind of breath that feels like the first real breath you've taken in years. I patted his neck. "Thank you," I whispered. I gathered my reins again, this time focusing not on the jump, but on him. On the feel of his muscles, on the sound of his breathing, on the steady rhythm he had taught me. We turned back to the jump. This time, I kept my legs on, I kept my breath even. I trusted him. He felt the change. His ears flicked back to me, then forward. He picked up his trot, found his spot, and hopped over. It wasn't a graceful jump. It was a practical, powerful hop. But it was perfect. One by one, we made our way around the course. We were slow. We were deliberate. The rain poured down, soaking us to the bone, but I was laughing. I was actually laughing. The fear was still there, but it was no longer in control. It was just a passenger. Atlas was in the driver's seat, and he was taking us home. The final jump was a small vertical. The rain was at its heaviest, and the ground was churned and deep. As we made our turn, Atlas's huge hoof sank deep into the mud. He stumbled, lurching forward. My old panic flared, a lightning bolt of adrenaline. I froze, waiting for the bolt, the spin, the disaster. Atlas stopped. He simply planted all 4 of his dinner plate-sized feet and stood still. He let out a soft snort, shaking his head, sending droplets of water flying. He turned his head, looking back at me with one calm, dark eye as if to say, "Whoa, that was slippery. You all right back there? Tears mixed with the rain on my face. In that moment, I understood everything. Apollo and I had been a partnership of fire, brilliant, fast, and capable of burning out. Atlas and I were a partnership of earth, slow, steady, unbreakable. His stop wasn't a refusal. It was the ultimate act of partnership. He was checking in. He was making sure we were both ready. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. I took a firm hold of the reins, not with fear, but with purpose. "I'm ready, buddy," I said, my voice clear and strong. "Let's go home." He turned back, gathered his immense power, and launched us over the final jump. It wasn't a jump of competition. It was a jump of triumph. We walked out of the arena, dead last on the scoreboard, covered in mud and rain. But as we passed through the in-gate, the small crowd, other riders, parents, friends, erupted into cheers. They weren't cheering for a clear round. They were cheering for the journey. They were cheering for the big, muddy horse and the rider who had finally come home. I slid off his back, my legs wobbly, not from weakness, but from emotion. I stood there in the deep footing, wrapped my arms around his neck, and sobbed. He lowered his head, resting his heavy jaw on my shoulder, bearing the weight of my release. He stood there for a long, long time, a patient, solid monument, letting the storm of my emotion wash over him until there was nothing left but a profound, quiet peace. He had carried me, not just over a few small jumps in the rain, but back from a place I thought I was lost in forever. He had taught me that the most important language isn't the one of winning. It's the one of trust. It's the unspoken conversation that says, "I am afraid," and receives the answer, "I know." "I am here." We are safe. That day, I found a new silence. A deeper, more resilient silence, forged in trust and tested by rain. And it was more beautiful than any victory gallop I had ever known.